What does someone need to do in Clubhouse to actually be successful?
Just be consistent.
Do you think there's any specific questions that a podcaster needs to be clear on in order to have a successful show?
The best place to start, Mark, honestly, is to just gain clarity on what we call your topic of influence. You can think about it in terms of the conversation that you most want to be a part of, that 1 or 2 word description of what it is that you focus on and how you want to be known.
Founder of Podcast Magazine, the leader of, actually the creator of the Clubhouse Clubpod, by the way, the largest podcasting club on Clubhouse. A lot of clubs going on there. 30-year entrepreneur, veteran, best-selling author, podcast host, Reinvention Radio. Listen, he's done it all, and he is here today to tell us about it. Steve Olsher, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, Steve, it's absolutely a pleasure. And full disclosure, I'm actually another leader in the Clubpod club on Clubhouse. It's a phenomenal club. You've built an amazing place for leaders and podcasters to do their thing. And you know what? Before we go into your backstage, the backstory on Steve, I'd like to hear from you. What was it like getting involved in Clubhouse? Why did you just start going all in on Clubhouse?
Man, I don't know the answer other than to know that I just trusted my gut on it, and it felt like there's a pretty interesting opportunity there. I've been in audio for a long time, and so when I first caught wind of it, kind of felt a little blog talk radio-y to me, right? I mean, there's an opportunity to have a chat with people from across wherever. And then I started digging in a little bit more, and I was like, this kind of feels a little more social media to me. And I was like, I think there may be an opportunity here, because especially as we were coming in, through the pandemic and people were feeling really disconnected, and then it's kind of like with this whole backlash, and you see a lot of backlash, Mark, and I'm sure you can appreciate this as well, against like the highly produced, highly polished kind of pieces of content that you see out there. And this was kind of like a throwback where you could just be raw and real and authentic, and you simply just show up, right, with nothing more than the phone in your hand. So you don't need any fancy equipment. You don't need any production crew, and the crowds at the time were pretty decent. But then by the time January hit and then February hit, I was going, man, this is a really interesting opportunity here. And I don't know if this will come to pass, but I know out of the gate, I thought, I wonder if it's going to get to the point where you can open a room and have, 100,000 people in there. And it's getting closer all the time. I mean, you see a lot of rooms with 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, some 8,000 person rooms. So it remains to be seen. But I just think for me, it was more a matter of looking at sort of the convergence of trends, right? And the opportunity to really connect with people in a deep, meaningful way that frankly, the other platforms don't allow for.
It's very different. It's very special. And one of the things that I'm interested in, Steve, is that difference, right? I know a lot of podcasters, some very, very big name podcasters, like top 200 style podcasts in business. They are anti-Clubhouse. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to see it. They don't want to talk about it. They're just completely uninvolved. So I got to ask, what does someone need to do in Clubhouse to actually be successful, to actually achieve some sort of goal? What do we need to actually do in Clubhouse?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really simple, and it's a lot simpler than people think. And I'm guilty of not following this formula, which is just be consistent. It's just as simple as that. The people who are doing really well, like I was just in a room with John Lee this morning. And so John Lee has built up a really good social following on the other platforms, and he's over 300,000, almost 400,000, I think, followers now on Clubhouse. And those are all one person at a time. Like, he did not get any of the auto follows. He wasn't automatically put into people's feeds, right? I mean, just one room, one sentence at a time. And it's because he's consistent. And he is on there every single day. It's a part of what he does, and it's a lot of what he does for marketing right now. And it's extraordinarily effective, but it's consistency.
Well, to me, I think the biggest differentiator with Clubhouse is it builds know, like, and trust so much faster to me than that one-way style of social media content that we've seen previously, right? Instagram post, know, like, and trust me. But it doesn't really work out that way. you also mentioned this collaboration, right? You're on a stage with him. You might not have necessarily had the opportunity to do that beforehand. How did you actually link up with John Lee?
Showing up. I mean, literally, I didn't know John before this, and it was a matter of just being consistent, just showing up in the rooms, having the opportunity to raise my hand, having the opportunity to come up on stage, and then having the opportunity to actually say something, I guess, that resonated enough with him, where he felt like, hey, this is a guy that's pretty smart. This is a guy that I would like to have up on my stage in the future. And so it was literally, and I know this sounds, just fairly basic, but it's, in this case, I will tell you that the people who are consistently showing up, and then you've got it absolutely correct, are collaborating with others on the platform, are the ones who are doing really, really, really well. And so it is very different, though, because ultimately, you can't get away with just shiny production. You can't get away with sitting in a fancy car. You can't get away, with shooting in a fancy house, right? I mean, people are going to connect with the words that come out of your mouth, and if you don't have anything decent to say, then the odds are pretty good you won't do well on the platform. So this is why I'm a huge proponent of what's going on in the world of social audio, and specifically Clubhouse. Because it is really an opportunity for everyone to thrive. I mean, you can look at somebody like Dane Cook, who I've become friends with on Clubhouse, someone who I did not know personally before. Dane Cook is a comedian, right? I mean, this guy has been around for a long time. I mean, he sold out Madison Square Garden before it was cool to do so. I mean, like, just huge following. And you look at him, he's got 18,000 followers, right, on Clubhouse. What does that mean? Well, it just means that there's an opportunity there for you to compete, right? I mean, if somebody like Dane has 18,000 followers, you're not that far behind, is the point.
Yeah. Well, and I can even be in rooms with people that have 100,000 followers, or on the flip side, I have 5,000 followers, and I bring someone in the room that has 100 followers. You can immediately understand that this person has useful information to bring to the table. And that's where the collaborations begin. It's really interesting that Dane is getting back into the scene too. He was huge in the MySpace days, and then I haven't heard from him in a while. And yeah, I mean, do you think that Clubhouse might be a way that he can reignite the fire that he had back 10, 20 years ago?
And he did it, right? From the standpoint of the rooms that he opens now vary from, 30, 40, 50 people up to, I've seen him lead rooms with 700, 800 people. Yeah. But he's doing it in a way where he's really just leading interesting conversations, and then ultimately he is inviting people to his new dates, and he's been selling out very, very quickly, using Clubhouse as a tool to drive ticket sales. And so it is it's an interesting way to connect with your tribe and connect with your community in ways that the other platforms just don't really allow you to do. So he's selling out shows using Clubhouse.
So this is a really interesting point that you bring up, the power of community, the power of tribe. And I think in Clubhouse, it's stronger than some of these other platforms that are out there, Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups, things of that nature. You've got the largest podcasting club on Clubhouse, Clubpod, right? All the time there's new shows, there's new events happening. How can I, as a creator on Clubhouse, how can I create a tribe in Clubhouse that's going to make people want to keep showing up or want to have communications with each other? Like, what's the key to actually building a tangible tribe on Clubhouse? Yeah,
so for me, it was always going to be about niche specific. Like, when I first saw the opportunity, and the intuition hit pretty early in terms of my time on Clubhouse, from the standpoint of, they're calling it Clubhouse for a reason, which means they're probably going to drive a lot of the algorithm in favor of the clubs. Mm-hmm. So the sooner you can get a club going, the more likely benefit you're going to see from your presence on the platform, right? And so when I started thinking about, okay, what club do I want to create? And then it became a matter of just where is the biggest opportunity in sort of the biggest niche. And for us, because we have been, publishing Podcast Magazine since 2020, early 2020, And I've been a podcaster since 2009. I really felt like that's where we wanted to hang our hat, because at the end of the day, you want to really figure out how to become an icon of influence in your respective niche. And so for me, what I knew to be true is I really wanted to hang my hat there and be seen as that icon of influence in the world of podcasting. And I knew it wasn't going to happen with the podcasts alone. I moved Reinvention Radio, which is our show. We sold Beyond Eight Figures, but Reinvention Radio, which is our show. I mean, it does okay, but it's not competing with Rogan. It's not a top 200 show.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to win that game. So for me, I want to win a winnable game. And that's where the idea of doing something around podcasters and doing something in the world of podcasting that supported Podcast Magazine and everything that we're doing there really just seemed to make the most sense. So I wanted something that was pithy. I wanted something that would show up in the little logo there at the bottom of people's feeds, and that would be legible. And I also knew that I didn't want to do this on my own. I also knew that it was, in order to really grow, we were going to have rooms going as often as possible, and it didn't make sense for me to have rooms going, 24/7. So I wanted to really collaborate, right, and bring in people who also shared the same passion for podcasts and podcast culture in the industry of podcasting as I do. And that's when we started bringing on some Clubpod leaders like yourself, right, to lead rooms and, and have these sort of conversations with folks, on a consistent basis. So I would just start there, and that's a long answer to your question, but I would start with just identifying, really what is that niche, and ultimately, where is the biggest opportunity and the biggest niche for you? And then how can you create something that other people want to be a part of? And obviously people support what they help to create.
Yeah. Well, and now you have the luxury of having such a large club that it's extremely beneficial for me as a creator to collaborate with you. I'd love hosting the rooms for Clubpod and with Clubpod because I get a ton of extra ear holes and eyeballs,
Yep.
So I love how you built. And the other thing that you said here that I think is really important, Steve, something I think a lot about is playing a game that you can actually win, right? Because going up against the download numbers of Joe Rogan, going to be tough to win that game. But if you can say, I'm going to build a very large community on this new platform, let's call it Clubhouse, very winnable game, and proof of that, proof positive. I also just want to give everyone an offer here. If you go to clubpod.club, that's clubpod.club, Steve's hooking you up with a free lifetime subscription to Podcast Magazine. So that's clubpod.club. I want to talk a little bit more about these social audio apps because this is something that's very new. It's only been around for several months here, and we're starting to see some other players come into the game like Green Room, like Twitter Spaces, and there's a couple other that are starting to come up here. Clubhouse being one of them, obviously. Like, how much time do you spend in Clubhouse versus these other social audio apps? Like, what's the percentage of time you're spending in each app?
Yeah, that's an easy question to answer because it's 99% in Clubhouse and 1% in the others. And so, I think you should be aware of the other platforms. And look, at the end of the day, maybe Green Room becomes a formidable competitor. Maybe Twitter Spaces builds a huge following on the backs of all the people who use Twitter on the daily. And maybe Clubhouse is a passing fancy. It's it's a fad and it disappears, right? I don't think we have any of those answers, and I think it's good to be aware of all the different platforms. But for me, it's 99% on Clubhouse, and it's 0.75% on Fireside, and about 0.25% on Green Room.
Interesting. Yeah, because I'm a big believer in trying the new thing because it's much easier to win the game when you're trying the new thing that's fresh and like Dane Cook, 17,000 followers, right? So that's something. But the flip side is that if you've got something that's working and it's rolling and you've got momentum, you absolutely want to lean into that too at the same time. So that's always been a challenge. I also want to hear your thoughts on Facebook. Facebook's starting to get into the podcasting game again. So hopefully these companies are solving the biggest challenge that podcasters have, in my opinion, which is engagement. It's very difficult to get feedback from your audience in podcasting. What do you make of the future of Facebook? Is this something that you're very bullish on? I'd love to hear from you, Steve.
Yeah, so it's twofold, right? Engagement obviously is on that list, as is discoverability. So, I mean, the tricky part in the world of podcasting is how do you get your show found, right? I mean, that's ultimately where the challenge lies for most. So, as I look at Facebook and the other players coming into the mix, to me, it's really just about discovery. It's really just about introducing your show and who you are to people that may not always, I mean, they may not have an opportunity to hear from you or know who you are. So anytime more money is invested into a particular industry, and at this point, social audio is really a new industry, right? I mean, it's brand new. This industry didn't really exist 6 months ago. So from that standpoint, green room investing in the space, Twitter investing, Facebook investing, all that really does is validate the need for the technology itself. And that's a really good thing. So, look, from my perspective, Facebook coming into the mix and giving you the opportunity to have your podcast heard by more people, even if it's just playing in the background or whatever it might be, or the live audio rooms that they're launching, it's a good thing for sure. I don't necessarily agree with the rollout in the way that some of these folks are rolling it out. From the standpoint of, I mean, we publish Podcast Magazine. I'm not saying that, I should have any special rights more so than anyone else. But for us not to have access to Facebook Audio's feature right now, in terms of being able to do live audio, unless they changed and I could check my phone, but I don't think they did, doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't even know if I can open a Twitter Spaces room, to be honest. And if I can, it certainly isn't very clear how to do it. So, but like I said, anytime there's investment in the space, that's a good thing, and it'll just raise the tide for everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly going to bring in more monetization opportunities as it becomes more, like you said, validated, right? Businesses have been sponsoring television programming and radio shows since I was born, right? But now we're starting to see it enter into the podcasting and social audio space. So I want to hear from you, Steve. If I'm a new podcaster just getting into it, like, what are the first ways I should look to monetize my podcast? How should I monetize my show?
I mean, monetization, as when you're just first starting out, should actually be the last thing on your mind. Not to say that you shouldn't give consideration, to how do I monetize my show and see an ROI on what I'm doing. But the reality is you have to deliver a really good product first. And I just see too many people delivering products that they wouldn't even listen to. So you have to ask yourself, first and foremost, would I even listen to my show? Like, what is it about your show that's special? And for a lot of people, look at, like, even my show, Reinvention Radio. I'm not convinced that my show has any unique qualities to it that stands head and shoulders above the other millions of podcasts that are available to folks, right? So monetization, great question. And you have to really think about it in terms of the product first. So, I'd say you've got to get the product first, get that down. And once you've got that dialed in and you actually create something that people are like, oh yeah, this is something I need to listen to or I want to listen to. Then you have myriad options from, of course, sponsors and advertisers and people that you collaborate with, to offering your own products, your own programs, your own services, et cetera. So, there's lots of options there, but if you don't have any listeners, it's kind of a moot point.
So you're looking at all these podcasts that are growing, all these great podcasters being featured in Podcast Magazine. Are there any common denominators that you see between all these fantastic shows? I'm kind of thinking back to your book, What is Your What? And I feel like probably a lot of the topics that you go over in the book would probably apply to a podcaster too. Because when I think, I'm hosting a lot of rooms at Clubhouse, and a lot of people will hop on stage and they'll say, like, I'll say, what's your show about? And he's like, well, I talk about all sorts of different topics. That's for all sorts of different people. Everyone's welcome. Come listen. Here's the download link. But do you think there's any specific questions that a podcaster needs to be clear on in order to have a successful show?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, right? And number one, and in the book, What is Your What, we talk about the What is Your What framework, which consists of three important, separate, but sort of cohesive elements, if you will, where they are both directly and indirectly tied together. From the standpoint of the What is Your What framework requires you to gain real clarity on what is your core gift, from the standpoint of how are you naturally wired to excel. Then it's a matter of understanding what is the primary vehicle that you will use to share that gift, and then ultimately who are the people that you are most compelled to serve, right? And so I do think that the best place to start for most people is with the fundamental question of what is my what? How am I naturally wired to excel? How do I want to share my gifts? And who are the people that I am most compelled to serve? And I think if you can start there, it helps to really narrow it down in terms of who are the people that you're actually speaking to. So think about who those people are. Who are the people that you are most compelled to serve? And then as you back it into then, okay, what can my show be about? What should I focus on when I take the stage? What is it that I should really be talking about? It's really important to have clarity around, what do you want to be known for? Right? Like for me, I want people to be able to talk about me and put me into a conversation even when I'm not in the room. I mean, if I'm in a room and I'm talking about a particular subject that's near and dear to my heart, well, then I'm in that room, I'm talking about it, it's easy for me to do. But your goal ultimately to become an icon of influence is for your name to come up in a very specific even when you're not in the room, right? And so for the best place to start, Mark, honestly, is to just gain clarity on what we call your topic of influence. You can think about it in terms of the conversation that you most want to be a part of, that 1 or 2 word description of what it is that you focus on and how you want to be known. Like for us, very simply, the word that I would use to describe our topic of influence in terms of how I want to be known in the world is I want my name to come up in the conversation of podcasting, right? So that's where you need to start, is what is the conversation that you most want to be part of? And so once you gain clarity on what that is, like for me, gaining clarity on the fact that the conversation that I most want to be part of is podcasting, well, then it opens up other doors where it becomes much easier to launch something like Podcast Magazine, because that's a solution to the problem of how do I become an icon of influence in the world of podcasting. Launching Clubpod. How do you become an influence in the world of podcasting? Well, between those two things, it's quickly, and when I say quickly, I mean like literally within the last year and a half, really elevated my status in the world of podcasting, so much so that some people will call me things that I would never call myself, like the king of podcasting and those sort of things, and it's just like, it's kind of weird and kind of surreal. But when people say, hey, if you want to learn more about podcasting, you got to check out what Steve Olsher is doing, that's how you know that you're doing the right things. And so yeah, I mean that's ultimately what I would say for those who are kind of scattered and trying to figure out what to focus on. Try to get it down to just 1 or 2 words.
I like that. I like this concept a lot. Get clear on your gift, get clear on your platform, get clear on your audience, and then stake your flag. Stake your flag and get people talking about you when you're not even in the room. And hopefully in a good way, right? Not talking about like, that Mark has bad breath or whatever, right? Let's say that Mark knows how to reproduce. I love that. I want to ask you, I want to get a bold prediction from you, Steve. You've been around a long time. You've seen a lot of trends come and go. Communication has evolved just tremendous amounts. I mean, if you look back to what we were communicating on when I was 20, like beepers and no mobile phones, we had pay phones. Like it was, I don't know how we actually ended up getting anywhere. I'm curious, in your opinion, Steve, what do you expect to change over the next 10 years? And I know this is a lot. 10 years from now, how do you think we're going to be communicating?
Well, I mean, look, I don't think there's any surprise that from a communication standpoint, it'll be more sort of otherworldly. In other words, you and I being able to have a conversation. I mean, you're starting to see this already, so it's not like I'm coming up with anything that doesn't already exist. It'll just hit more of the mainstream. But the ability for us to be virtually together in a physical, so to speak, environment will just become a million times easier here over the next 10 years. So if you want to have a family gathering, like you will literally be able to have a family gathering with people from no matter where they are in the world and be in the same space through virtual reality and augmented reality and of course, all of the various technologies that go hand in hand with that. So I mean, in terms of communication, whether it be through something directly on your face, God forbid it should be something implanted, which I don't think is that far into the future either. 10 years, I don't know, but I do know that being in that virtual or augmented reality space in terms of communication is, I mean, it's already happening, and it's just simply going to, in terms of its adoption, you'll just see much more adoption around communicating through sort of let's just call it even a one touch, or even as scary as this may sound, but like a mental trigger, where it's kind of like, I want to call Mark, and I can even just think about it, and that's scary too. But the way in which we physically have to do things to communicate is changing rapidly.
It's really interesting stuff. And I definitely am with you there on the ability to remotely connect and feel like you're in the same place. I almost wonder if in 10 years, you're going to have your family room, you're going to have your kitchen, your bathroom, you're going to have the VR room where you go and you do all your virtual reality. You go to work there, right? Maybe you go on dates. Who knows? Yeah. It's going to be a weird world. So listen, we're here with Steve Olsher from Podcast Magazine, founder of Podcast Magazine, founder of Clubpod on Clubhouse, podcast host of Reinvention Radio. I'm going to have a bunch of links below for everyone. But before I let you go, Steve, I got to hit you with some overrated, underrated questions. All right. Overrated, underrated. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Overrated, underrated, a lavalier microphone.
Actually, I would say underrated, because the reality is they're fairly inexpensive. And if you're shooting video, then having a decent amount of sound and sound quality come through is pretty easy to do, and it's fairly inexpensive.
I'm with you. Overrated, underrated, podcasting, recording a podcast on your cell phone.
I would say overrated for sure. There's something to be said for the simplicity of doing a podcast on your phone. But I mean, again, that's the same reason why you don't see a lot of people doing a lot of recording of evergreen podcasts on social audio. Just because the audio quality is never going to be nearly as good as what you can get in a studio, and even with just a decent microphone. I mean, you don't need anything crazy, but any sort of USB is going to sound monumentally better than what you're going to do on your phone.
Yeah, agree again. Overrated, underrated, the Marvel Avenger movies.
I mean, I would say pretty much square dead in the middle. I mean, I would say there's a lot of people who are just pure comic book fans that would say they're overrated. And I would say there are, like the purists, it's going to be hard to please them about anything. And then I would say that there are folks who haven't seen them because they think they're comic book movies, and they're just going to be crap, and would underrate those shows, those films. But I would actually say that, and they're pretty damn entertaining. And the reality is, I can see people sitting on both sides of that. But for me, I think they're good quality fun.
Yeah, I'm with you. The last Avenger movie, it kind of lost me with the time travel in the universe. And not time travel. It got a little weird, but, we got back all the people that we lost. So no spoiler alerts. Anyway, overrated, underrated, recording your podcast in Clubhouse.
I would actually say underrated. I know this flies in the face of exactly what I just said 12 seconds ago, but we actually record all of our podcasts now live on Clubhouse. And we do that because we like the interaction. I like being able to involve the community, involve the tribe in the conversation. And so for me, some of the best questions for our guests come from the people who ask those questions, and that's not always me. So, reality is, to me, it's underrated, and I would say that more people should be doing it. But the caveat there is do it not from your phone. Just run it through a board and actually make it sound decent, as good as you can on your end, so at least one of the feeds sounds halfway good.
Yeah, I'm with you. The biggest challenge I've had with recording this podcast on Clubhouse is that it's very hard to synchronize the video and the audio together, and I'm big into repurposing for video. So Steve, loved having you here. Final question for you. If you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, what would you tell Steve?
I would tell Steve not to sell liquor.com, but to keep the domain and just lease it to the guys that I was going into business with. And then I'd still have ownership of it. And there you go.
Liquor.com, real estate. Perfect. Steve, it's been a pleasure. Really look forward to seeing what you come up with next. Thanks for being on the After Hours Entrepreneur.
Appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed this episode. I've got several other episodes right here for you. Smash one of these videos to make sure that you don't miss out on the tips, tools, and tactics of industry experts. Let's take that side hustle full time. Smash one of these links.